My daughter begged me to sell my house and move across the country to be near her. 8 months later, she said I was too much and asked me to find my own place and stop coming around so often. I sold my home of 22 years, moved 3 states away, and gave up everything I knew, and 8 months later she told me I was suffocating her. My name is Patricia Okafor. Everyone who loves me calls me Pat. I'm 67 years old. I want to tell you about a house. It sat on a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio. 3 bedrooms. A front porch with 2 wooden chairs I repainted every other spring. A backyard garden I had been tending for 22 years. Roses along the back fence. A vegetable patch that got bigger every year. A maple tree my husband Leonard planted when our daughter Simone was born. I raised my children in that house. I buried my husband from that house. I spent 22 years building a life inside those walls and in the neighborhood around them. My church was 4 blocks away. I had been a member for 18 years. My book club met on the second Tuesday of every month in rotating living rooms, and I had been a member of that too for 11 years. My neighbor Carolyn and I had a standing Saturday morning walk that we had not broken in 7 years except for the 2 weeks I had pneumonia a few years back. I had a life, a full-rooted, known life. And then my daughter asked me to leave it. Not in those words. The words she used were warmer than that. The words were, "We want you here. We need you here. The kids barely know their grandmother. Move to Scottsdale. Be near us. It'll be so good for everyone." I resisted for almost a year. And then I said yes. I sold the house. I packed up 22 years. I said goodbye to Carolyn and to my church and to my book club and to the neighbor children who had grown up knowing my name. I moved to Scottsdale. Into an apartment my daughter chose for me, 10 minutes from her house, in a city I had never particularly wanted to live in. I did it because she asked, because she said she wanted me there, because I believed her. 8 months later, she sat me down and told me I was too much. That I was there too often. That she needed space. That I should pull back, stop coming over so much, make my own life here. "I moved here for you," I said. "I sold my house. You asked me to come." She said, "I know, but it's different now that you're actually here." I have thought about that sentence every day since. It's different now that you're actually here. I have tried to understand what it means, what it was supposed to communicate, whether it was an apology or an explanation or simply the most honest thing she could find to say. I have not found a version of it that doesn't hurt. This is the story of what it costs to believe that the people who love you have thought through what they're asking, and what you do when you discover they hadn't. My daughter Simone is 39 years old. She has always been, in many ways, the child who moved toward life rather than waiting for it. From the time she was small, she had plans. Big plans, quick plans, vivid plans that arrived with enthusiasm, and sometimes outpaced their own foundations. She was not a malicious child. She was not manipulative. She was, and still is, someone whose imagination of how things will be tends to run ahead of her understanding of how things actually are. I say this not to diminish her. I say it because I think it is the truest explanation for what happened to me. Not cruelty, not calculation. An imagination that invited me into a picture it had painted without having fully considered the texture of it. Simone moved to Scottsdale 12 years ago for her husband Derrick's job. She built a life there, a good life from the outside and genuinely so on the inside too, I believe. 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. 2 children. A boy named Jordan who is 8 and a girl named Amara who is 6. Derrick works in technology and earns well. Simone works part-time as a reading tutor and spends the rest of her time running the household and the children's activities with the kind of organized efficiency I recognize in her from when she was small. She is a good mother. I want to say that clearly. She loves her children with the full physical intensity of a woman who chose this life deliberately. She is present and warm and consistent in the ways that matter most. She was also for 12 years far from me. For 12 years, our relationship was managed across distance, phone calls, video calls, visits twice a year, the children growing in photographs and video clips rather than in the living presence of their grandmother's kitchen. I knew Jordan and Amara, but I knew them the way you know someone you have visited, not the way you know someone you have held and fed and walked to school. That gap was real. I had felt it quietly since Amara was born. When Leonard died 4 years ago, the gap became heavier. He died in February, a Tuesday morning, of a heart attack. He had seemed fine the night before. We had eaten dinner at the kitchen table and talked about what we would plant in the spring and gone to bed at 10:30 as we always did. At 3 in the morning I woke to a sound I could not identify. And by the time the ambulance arrived, there was nothing to be done. 41 years of marriage, gone in the space of a night. The grief was enormous. I will not walk through it in full. I think everyone who has lost a long marriage understands the particular geography of that loss well enough that I don't need to map it here. But it was enormous, and it changed things, and I had to learn to live inside a house that had previously contained 2 people and now contained only 1. I learned. Slowly, over 2 years, I built a new daily life. The Saturday walks with Carolyn became more important. The book club became more important. I took on more hours at my volunteer work, reading tutoring at a literacy program downtown, which I had done for several years but expanded after Leonard died because the structure and the purpose of it helped anchor me. I was not thriving, but I was not falling apart. I was managing. Simone watched this from Scottsdale and worried. She called every Sunday evening without fail. She asked questions, careful ones, how I was sleeping, whether I was eating, whether I was getting out. She was attentive in the way adult children are attentive when they are concerned about a parent but also managing their own full lives across a significant distance. Then, in the spring of the year before I moved, the campaign began. It started gently. "Mom, wouldn't it be nice to be closer to the kids?" She said it the first time casually, as if she were just thinking out loud. The second time, the following week, it was more direct. "I really think you should consider Scottsdale. You could be near us. You could see Jordan and Amara every week. They're growing so fast, Mom. You're missing it." I said I was happy in Columbus. I said my life was here. She said, "But are you really happy? Since Dad died?" She knew the answer to that question. The honest answer was not exactly happy, no. Managing was more accurate. Building something more accurate still. But happiness in the fullest sense, the specific warm fullness of a life completely inhabited, that had been harder to access since Leonard died. And Simone knew that because I had been honest with her about it. The calls continued, week after week. The framing varied, but the request didn't. "Come here, Mom. Sell the house. Be with us. We want you here. The kids talk about you all the time," she said. "Jordan asked me last week why Grandma Pat lives so far away. He doesn't understand. I don't want them to grow up without really knowing you. Amara wants to bake cookies with you on a regular Tuesday. Not a special visit Tuesday. Just a regular Tuesday. Derrick and I were talking about it and we both agree we want you here. Not visits. We want you here." Every call added something to the picture. Every call painted it a little more vivid, a little more possible, a little more like something I would be foolish to decline. She was not careless about it. She made the case thoughtfully, building on each previous call, responding to every hesitation I offered. When I said I was worried about the heat, Scottsdale summers were brutal. I had visited in August once and found the temperature genuinely alarming. She sent me articles about the milder months and pointed out that the dry air was easier on my joints than the damp Ohio winters. When I said I was worried about leaving my church, she looked up congregations in her neighborhood and sent me 3 she thought I would like. When I said I wasn't sure I could afford Scottsdale on my fixed income, she pulled up apartment listings and showed me that comparable square footage was not dramatically different from Columbus if you chose the right area. She had an answer for everything. Not a dismissive answer. She took each concern seriously, treated it like a real obstacle to be solved rather than an excuse to be managed. That care felt like love to me. The effort of it felt like proof of how much she wanted it. I told her once, about 8 months into the campaign, that I was afraid of losing what I had built in Columbus. She said, "I know, Mom, but you can build again. And this time you'll build it right next to us." That sentence stayed with me in the months that followed. The confidence in it. The easy assurance that what had taken me decades to build could be recreated in a new place, and that the presence of family would make the process natural and relatively swift. I should have asked more questions about what that rebuilding would actually look like. I should have asked, "How often do you envision seeing me? What happens when the novelty of proximity fades and your household returns to its own established rhythms? What is the actual texture of this life you are describing?" I didn't ask those questions. I was 66 years old, and I was lonely in a house that had grown very quiet, and my daughter was painting a picture of something warmer and fuller, and I wanted to live in that picture. I talked to Carolyn about it. Carolyn, who has known me for 14 years, and who has the particular quality of honesty that comes from long friendship and no investment in telling you what you want to hear. She said, "What's keeping you here, Pat?" "My life," I said. "Your life can move," she said. And then after a pause, "Some of it." I thought about that for a long time. I thought about Leonard, who I would not be moving toward or away from, Because Leonard was in a grave at East Lawn Cemetery, and I would carry him regardless of what state I lived in. I thought about Jordan asking why Grandma Pat lives so far away. I thought about Amara wanting to bake cookies on a regular Tuesday. I called Simone and said, "Tell me exactly what this would look like. Not the idea of it. The actual plan." She was ready. She had thought about it, or she gave the impression of having thought about it. I could not tell the difference then. She described an apartment complex near her that was nice, affordable, had a pool. She said I could pick up the kids from school 2 or 3 days a week if I wanted to. She said Sunday dinners every week. She said she worked from home on Tuesdays and we could overlap, get coffee, be nearby. It sounded like a life. A smaller one than I had in Columbus, but a different one. One with family in it in a daily way. I said yes. I said yes in October. I gave myself 6 months to prepare. I listed the house in January. It sold in 11 days. A number that surprised me, though I suppose it shouldn't have. The market was what it was and the house was in good condition. 11 days. I stood in the kitchen after the offer came in and I looked at the walls and I thought, someone else will cook here. Someone else will sit at this table. Someone else's children will run through this hallway and track mud in through the back door, and fight about the television in the living room. I donated things I could not take with me and packed the rest. I gave away Leonard's workbench to our neighbor Dale, who had admired it for years and who accepted it with a solemnity that seemed right. I gave the roses along the back fence what I privately thought of as a proper goodbye, spending one last Saturday morning out there with my hands in the soil and the sun on my neck, talking to them a little, which is something I had always done and which Leonard had always pretended not to notice, with the gentle amusement of a man who accepted that his wife was the sort of person who talked to plants. I said goodbye to my church in a way that undid me more than I had expected, sitting in my pew for the last time on a Sunday morning in April, listening to music I had been listening to for 18 years, crying in a way I had not cried since Leonard's funeral. Pastor Williams embraced me after the service and told me I would be held in prayer, which I know is something people say but which I also know he meant. I said goodbye to Carolyn in her driveway on a Thursday morning. We both knew that a standing Saturday walk was not something you replicated. You could find other walks, other companions, but you could not find the specific version of something you had tended for 7 years together. We stood in that driveway for a while without rushing ourselves, which felt like the right way to do it. "You can always come back," she said. "I know," I said, though we both understood that coming back to a city after selling your house is not the same as having been there all along. We said we would visit. I believe we will when we can, but visits are not the same as Tuesday mornings. I moved to Scottsdale in May. The first month was genuinely good, better than I had feared and close to what I had hoped. Simone had set up the apartment ahead of my arrival. She had bought a few pieces of furniture, arranged things practically, put a succulent on the kitchen windowsill that made me smile. It wasn't home yet, but it felt like the beginning of home, like something I could grow into. I picked up Jordan and Amara from school on their first Tuesday after my arrival. Jordan, who at 8 had the careful reserve of a child who needed time before he opened up, was quiet in the back seat of my car. Amara, who at 6 had no such reserve and never had, talked without pausing from the school gate to my apartment door, where she looked around with wide eyes and immediately asked if we could bake something. We made banana bread. When I brought them back to Simone's house that evening, Simone was standing in the kitchen looking tired but genuinely happy to see us. She hugged me. She said, "This is already better, Mom. Can you feel it?" I could. Sunday dinners were warm and full. Derrick, who is a quiet man but a kind one, made an effort to include me in conversation. The children fought over who would sit next to Grandma Pat. After dinner we would sit on the back patio and watch the sun go down over the desert landscape that I had not yet learned to love the way I loved the maple tree in my backyard in Columbus, but that was strange and beautiful in its own way. I thought I had made the right choice. The shift was so gradual I almost didn't see it begin. In month 3, the Sunday dinner started to become every other Sunday. The first time it happened, Simone said they had a conflict, Derrick's work function, a Saturday night that ran late and made Sunday morning chaotic. It made sense. It happened again the following week. The children had birthday parties and the logistics were too complicated. It made sense again. By month 4, every other Sunday was simply the new rhythm. There was no conversation about it. Just became what it was. Also in month 3, I noticed Simone was texting more than calling. This may sound like a small thing, but over the previous year of calls, the campaign year, the year of We Want You Here, we had spoken on the phone multiple times a week. Long calls, warm calls. Now her contact was largely brief texts. A photo of the children, a reminder about pickup time, A question about whether I needed anything from the grocery store. I told myself she was busy. She had always been busy. Proximity was different from availability, and I needed to give her room to manage her own life without expecting that being nearby would mean being constantly in contact. I told myself these things because they were true and because I wanted them to be sufficient. In month 4, I came to pick up the children on a Wednesday afternoon, a day I had been picking them up for months, and when I arrived, Simone came to the door with an expression I did not know how to read. "Mom," she said, "I told you we'd do Tuesdays and Thursdays. Wednesday is our day." I thought I was picking them up today. I had it written down. I sent a text last week saying we were switching to Tuesday and Thursday only. Did you not get it? I had not seen the text. Or I had seen it and misread the schedule change. I apologized. It was a small miscommunication. But the way she looked at me, briefly, before she rearranged her face into something more neutral, stayed with me, like I had been an intrusion, like my presence at her door, which I had come to because I loved her children and wanted to be useful to her, had registered as an imposition. 2 weeks later, I stopped by her house on a Saturday afternoon. I had been to the farmer's market and bought tomatoes and thought she might want some. She had mentioned the week before that she was making a pasta sauce. I rang the bell. Simone answered. She looked over my shoulder before she looked at me. "Mom, I wish you'd texted first. I was just dropping off tomatoes." "I know, but we have a system. We appreciate you, but Saturday afternoons are family time for us. We'd rather you called first." I drove home with half the tomatoes because she took the other half. I put the rest in my kitchen and I sat at my small table and I felt something shift in me that I could not name precisely but that I recognized. Not anger. Something quieter and more unsettling than anger. I had driven across a city to bring my daughter tomatoes from the farmer's market. And she had asked me to call first. I want to be fair here. I want to try genuinely to hold her perspective alongside mine. She had a family, a household with rhythms and structures and the particular organized chaos of a home with 2 young children. She was not wrong to want those structures respected. She was not wrong to want Saturday afternoons to belong to her family. She was not wrong in any absolute sense to ask me to communicate before arriving. But I had sold my house. I had left Carolyn and my church and my book club and my garden and my maple tree. I had moved 3 states into a city I didn't choose because she asked me to. Because she said, "We want you here, we need you here, the children barely know you, come be near us." She had invited me. She had spent a year persuading me. And now that I was here, I was being asked to come on a schedule, to text before I arrived, to make sure Saturday afternoons stayed clear. I called Marcus. My son Marcus is 42 years old. He lives in Atlanta with his wife Priya and their 3 children. He is a steadier man than this situation required, methodical, careful, not prone to dramatic responses. But he is honest with me and I needed honesty. I told him what had been happening. Not just the Saturday tomatoes but all of it, the shift in Sunday dinners, the texting instead of calling, the Wednesday door. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Has Simone said anything directly to you about how she's feeling?" "Not yet. Not in so many words." "I think she needs to. I think you two need to have a real conversation about what you each expected and what the reality actually is." "What do you think is happening, Marcus?" Another pause. "I think Simone wanted you there in theory more than she was ready for you there in practice. And I think it's going to take her a while to figure out how to say that." He was right. 3 weeks after the Saturday tomatoes, Simone called and asked me to come over for coffee. Not a pickup day. Not a Sunday. A specific invitation, a Tuesday morning, just the 2 of us. I knew, in the way you know things you have been circling for weeks, that this conversation had been assembled and was waiting. Simone made coffee. We sat at her kitchen table, the table where I had eaten Sunday dinners, where I had watched Jordan and Amara do homework while Simone cooked. She sat across from me and she had the particular composed expression of someone who had practiced what they were about to say. "Mom," she said, "I love you. I want you to know that before anything else." "I know you do," I said. "This has been harder to adjust to than I expected. Having you here, close. It's different from what I thought it would be." "Tell me what you thought it would be," I said. She paused. "I thought it would feel like extra support, like having more family around. But it's felt more like, I don't know how to say this without it sounding wrong." "Say it anyway," I said. "It's felt like there's another person in our household, not literally, but in terms of the emotional weight. You're always available, Mom. You text to check in. You drop by. You're always ready to help. And I think because you're so available, I've started to feel pressure to use that availability. To include you, to keep you updated, to manage your expectations of how often we see each other. And it's starting to feel like a lot. I listened to all of this. Then I said, I'm available because I moved here for you. I gave up my whole life in Columbus to be available to you. You asked me to come. I know, she said. And I'm grateful. I really am. Are you? Because what you're describing sounds like having me here has become a burden. She looked at the table. Not a burden. Just different from what I pictured. What did you picture? She didn't answer immediately. I pictured you having your own full life here. Friends, activities, your own routines. And then fitting into our life at the edges. Sunday dinners. The kids a few times a week. But I didn't picture you being oriented around us. Around whether we were including you. Simone. I kept my voice as steady as I could. I have been here for 8 months. I don't have friends here. I don't have a church. I don't have a Carolyn. I don't have 30 years of roots anywhere in this city. I have my apartment and I have you and the children, and that is everything I have here. Because I am 67 years old and it takes more than 8 months to build a life from nothing, especially when you are doing it alone in a place you did not choose. She said, I know. I think I underestimated how long that would take. You also underestimated, I said carefully, that I cannot build a life from nothing if the reason I came here doesn't leave room for me to be in it. She was quiet. I'm not asking for unlimited access, I said. I'm asking for what was described to me before I sold my house. Sunday dinners. The children a few times a week. Coffee on Tuesdays. That is what was described to me. That is what I moved here for. And in the last 3 months, all of that has become less and less. I know, she said again. Her voice had changed. Less composed. I didn't mean for it to go that way. It just started to feel like too much and I didn't know how to say it. So instead of saying it, you pulled back until I felt it. She didn't answer. But her face did. I need you to pull back more, she said quietly. I need Saturdays to be ours. I need more space between the visits. I need to feel like our home is ours, without someone always on the edge of it. And I need you to build your own life here, not just wait for us to provide yours. I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table. This child I had raised. The child I had sat with through every fever, every heartbreak, every late night she needed someone to listen to. The child I had loved for 39 years with the steady, whole, unglamorous devotion of a mother. And I said, I moved here for you. I sold my home. I left my friends and my church and a life I had built over 22 years. You spent a year asking me to come. You told me the children wanted me. You told me you wanted me. I believed you. And now you're sitting here telling me that me being here is too much. She said, it's not too much. It's just different from what I expected. I had heard that before. I recognized it as the sentence she returned to when she didn't have a better one. It's different now that I'm actually here, I said. She looked up, surprised I was using her words back to her. Yes, she said softly. I finished my coffee. I stood up. I put my cup in the sink. I need to think, I said, about what I want, about what comes next. I drove back to my apartment and sat in it for a long time. I thought about the house in Columbus, sold now, belonged to someone else, occupied by a family I would never know. I thought about the maple tree in the backyard that Leonard had planted, that had been someone else's for 6 months and would be someone else's for all the years after. I thought about my husband, about what Leonard would have said if he had been alive to watch this unfold. He was not a man who spoke quickly when he was angry. He had a capacity for sitting quietly with a thing before he addressed it that I had always admired and occasionally found maddening. I think he would have sat with this for a day or two and then said something careful and accurate that I would not want to hear, and that would turn out to be exactly right. I don't know what those words would have been. I have thought about it many times. What I think I know is that he would have told me that Simone is our child, and that being our child means she carries something of both of us, my practicality, but also my tendency to jump toward what I want before I have thought through the implications. His warmth, but also his sometimes frustrating reluctance to have difficult conversations before they become necessary. She had gotten it from somewhere. That thought did not make me less hurt, but it made me feel, in a different way, like I was looking at a recognizable person rather than a stranger. And that recognition mattered. I thought about Carolyn, who I called later that afternoon, who listened to everything I told her without interrupting, Who then said, in the direct and loving way that is entirely Carolyn, "What do you need, Pat?" Not what Simone needs. What do you need? I had to sit with that question for a while before I could answer it. What I needed was not, I realized, to punish Simone. Not to make her feel guilty, though some guilt seemed appropriate under the circumstances. Not to go backward because there was no backward available. The house was sold. Columbus had moved on without me. What I needed was to build something real in Scottsdale. Not because it was what I would have chosen. Not because the conditions were ideal or fair. But because I was here, and I had to live somewhere, and existing in resentment and suspension while waiting for my daughter to give me permission to feel at home was a form of suffering I refused to accept indefinitely. I found a church the following Sunday. Not right away, the first one didn't fit, the second one was too far, the third one had a quality in its music and in its congregation that reminded me enough of home to make me stay. I went back 3 Sundays in a row. By the fourth, 2 women had introduced themselves. By the second month I was a regular. Their names are Doris and Winifred. Doris is 63 and recently retired from 30 years of nursing, and she has the calm, matter-of-fact warmth of someone who has been holding difficult things for other people for so long that it has become simply who she is. Winifred is 71 and a widow like me, and she understood, in the first real conversation we had, the specific weight of learning to be singular after decades of being plural. We did not need to explain much to each other. We just knew. I found a community garden not far from my apartment that accepted new members in the fall. The plot assigned to me was small, barely enough for herbs and a few tomato plants, but it was mine. It was soil I could put my hands into. It was something alive that would respond to attention and care. It was not my garden in Columbus, with the roses along the back fence and the maple tree at the edge of the grass. The desert grows differently. The plants here are succulent and spare and built for endurance rather than abundance. I have come to find them quietly beautiful in a way that took time to see, the way most honest beauty does. I found through the church a book club. 8 women, most of them older than Simone and younger than me, who met on the first Thursday of each month. They had been reading together for 4 years and were the kind of group that had developed the comfortable shorthand of people who trust each other's opinions. They welcomed me without fuss, which is the best kind of welcome. The first book we read together after I joined was a novel I had read once before years ago, and had thought I remembered. Reading it alongside these 8 women taught me that I had remembered it entirely wrong, that I had read it at a stage of life that could not access what it was actually about. That felt right. That felt like exactly what I had needed without knowing I needed it. I called Marcus and told him what I was doing. He said, "Good. That's good, Mom." And then after a moment, "I'm sorry it had to go this way." "It doesn't have to stay this way," I said. "Things go wrong and then people fix them. That's what we do." "You're better at that than most people," he said. I don't know if that is true, but it was kind. I had a conversation with Simone 6 weeks after the coffee. A different kind of conversation. I told her what I had understood and what I was building and what I needed from her in practical terms. Sunday dinners twice a month at minimum. The children on Tuesdays and Thursdays as established. Advance notice when the schedule changed, rather than a text I might miss. And the understanding that I would also be building a life outside of her household, which was what she had asked of me, and that she should not interpret that building as a withdrawal of love. "I'm really sorry, Mom," she said, "about how this has gone. I meant everything I said when I was asking you to move. I just didn't think it through completely." "I know," I said. "I believe that. I should have thought it through." "Yes," I said. "You should have." We sat with that for a moment, not comfortably, but honestly. "Can we fix it?" she asked. "I think so," I said. "But I need you to understand that there was a real cost to what happened. I don't say that to make you feel terrible indefinitely, but the cost was real, and I need you to know it before we move forward." She said she knew. I believe she was beginning to. There is a thing that happens in relationships between mothers and adult daughters that I had not fully understood until I was in the middle of it. Adult daughters love their mothers, often genuinely deeply in ways that are real and not performed, but they sometimes love the idea of their mother more than they have made room for the actual person. The idea is warm and helpful and present in the right amounts. The actual person has needs and feelings and a past, and a particular way of being in the world that may not always fit neatly into the life the daughter has built. Simone loved me. She wanted me near. She believed, I think genuinely, that having me close would enrich her family's life the way you imagine a thing will enrich your life before you have experienced it. And then I arrived. The actual me. The me with my own rhythms and my own needs and my own loneliness that was larger than she had accounted for. Because she had painted me into the picture without fully calculating what it meant for me to be in it. She had not meant to mislead me, but the invitation she extended and the life it described were not the same thing. That gap between the invitation and the life is where I live now. Not in the gap itself, but in the work of closing it. The slow, patient, unsexy work of making a real life in a real place with real people, rather than in the version anyone imagined beforehand. I am still in Scottsdale. I will probably stay in Scottsdale. Not because it was my choice. Not because it is Columbus. Not because the desert landscape has fully replaced the maple tree in the way that one beloved thing eventually becomes another beloved thing, given enough time and attention. But because I am building something here. Slowly and perfectly, with the practical determination of a woman who has built a life before and knows it is done one small thing at a time. The church, Doris and Winifred, the garden and its desert-adapted plants that are teaching me to find beauty in endurance. The book club and its 8 women who have begun to know my name and my opinions and the particular way I laugh at something I find genuinely funny rather than merely polite. Jordan, who has opened up in the patient gradual way of children who take their time and then give you everything, and who told me last Tuesday that I was his favorite person to ride home from school with because I didn't ask how his day was before he was ready to tell me. Amara, who baked banana bread with me last week for what was probably the 12th time and who told me, with the absolute certainty of a 6-year-old, that mine was better than anyone else's in the world. These things are real. They are what I came here for, in the truest sense, not the idea of proximity, but the actual texture of being known by small people who are growing up. That part was not wrong. That part was worth something. I want to be precise about that. Not everything about this situation was wrong. The move itself, the fact of being near the children, of becoming a real and daily presence in their lives rather than a twice-yearly visitor, that is good. That is what I hoped for. Jordan knowing that I will not ask about his day until he is ready to tell me about it. Amara believing with her whole heart that my banana bread is the best in the world. These are not small things. They do not cancel out the cost, but they exist alongside it, and I think holding both at once is the only honest way to talk about what happened. The cost of getting here was too high. The terms I was sold were not the terms I received. The year-long campaign and the warmth of it, the careful painting of a picture that turned out to have significant details missing, that was not fair, and I will not pretend it was. But I have a decision to make every day about whether to live in the wound of it or to live in the life I am building alongside it. I choose the life. Not because the wound isn't real. It is. Not because I have fully forgiven the carelessness that caused it, because forgiveness of that kind is slow and mine is not complete. But because I am 67 years old and I know something now that you can only know after a certain amount of living. Time is not a resource to be spent waiting for other people to get things right. It is yours. Entirely yours. And what you build with it belongs to you in a way that nothing else does. I am building something. Here. In a city I did not choose, in soil that is not the soil I knew, among people I am only beginning to know. And I find more and more that the building itself is the point. Not the finished thing. Not the completed life you can step back and evaluate as a whole, but the daily act of choosing to add something, to plant something, to show up somewhere new and let yourself be a little known. That is what I have left. That is more than enough to work with. I am not done yet. I want to say one more thing directly to any parent who is being asked right now to make a similar move. Being told that your children want you near them is one of the most powerful things you can hear. Touches something very deep. Something that has been there since you first held them. Since every year of showing up for them that accumulates into the long record of a parent's love. But wanting someone near and being prepared for what nearness actually requires are two different things. And if you are considering a move like the one I made, if you are sitting with the picture someone you love is painting for you and weighing whether to believe it, I would ask you this, not whether they love you. I'm sure they do. But whether they have thought through, in practical and honest detail, what that proximity will actually look like on a Tuesday afternoon in month 5. What it will look like on the 10th ordinary weekend in a row. Whether the warmth of the invitation will still be there when the day-to-day reality of it lands. Ask those questions. Ask them out loud. Before you sell your house. Have you ever uprooted your entire life for someone who asked you to, only to discover the invitation had conditions you were never told about? Have you ever loved someone enough to give up everything, only to be told you were too much once you arrived? Have you ever had to rebuild a life in a place you didn't choose because there was no going back? Share your story in the comments. You are not alone in this. If you believe that asking someone to uproot their life comes with a responsibility to mean it, that you cannot spend a year convincing someone to give up everything and then tell them they're too much once they arrive, Hit that like button and subscribe. Because love is not just a feeling, it is a set of choices. And some choices once made for someone cannot simply be undone. Hashtag she sold everything for her